Welcome to the Four Witnesses of the Messiah, Chapter 1, Session 5B. New Testament Chronology, Part 1. As we continue to build the foundation for our study of the four Gospels, a very important part of the picture is to determine the length of Christ's ministry. Was it 3.5 years or about 1 year? That affects a lot of things. For instance, it affects any attempt at producing a gospel harmony, that is, assembling the incidents recorded in the four Gospels into one chronological sequence. We will be referencing several harmonies in this class. It also affects the target date for the crucifixion, because most theologians say that was 33 A.D., when the 14th of Nisan fell on Good Friday. Another theologian says it was 32 A.D., Sir Robert Anderson, in order to get his math to work. But one cannot get 3 days and 3 nights between Good Friday and Easter Sunday morning, no matter how you count. So 33 A.D. is out, so is 32 A.D., I believe that the crucifixion occurred on a Wednesday, and the resurrection was Saturday night. So, my target year for Holy Week is 28 A.D., when the 14th of Nisan fell on a Wednesday. The Hebrew year prior to that year had an extra intercalary month, a second Adar, a 13th month. That's just before Nisan. But then we have to take into account the relationship of a 1 year or a 3.5 year ministry with the year of Jesus' birth. Scholars argue about that too, but I think we've conclusively proven that it was in 3 BC. And that's because of the astronomical data. I present that in my book, Happy Belated Birthday, Jesus. Now, we'll be covering a lot of those things in future sessions. And we could have approached this chronology stuff several different ways, having the segments about each facet of it in different order. But I chose to present this facet tonight because I think it fits best in light of what we just covered in session 5A. You will see why soon. I believe that the ministry of Jesus Christ was about a year long, 70 weeks to be exact. I'm going to present that tonight. But I'm going to quote you first a paragraph out of the Chronological Gospels by Michael Rood, R-O-O-D. And he says, quote, "The Gospel record that exactly 70 weeks, 490 days, transpired from the day that Yeshua, Jesus, was baptized in water until the day he fulfilled his initial mission by baptizing his disciples with the Holy Spirit, a direct fulfillment of one of the 3 layers of the cryptic prophecy that the angel Gabriel declared to Daniel. Nearly 3 centuries after the death of the eyewitnesses, Eusebius, the bishop of Caesarea, fabricated a unique 3.5 year ministry that utterly destroyed any possibility of understanding the chronology of Yeshua's ministry. Unfortunately, Eusebian eschatology made it impossible to accurately determine the years of his birth and resurrection." Unquote. Since then, most Christian scholars maintain that the length of Christ's ministry on earth from his baptism to the day of Pentecost following his ascension was 3.5 years. I believe that if Christ was our Passover, as 1 Corinthians 5 documents, that he had to be a lamb of the first year, having a 1-year ministry. Like it says, 1 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 7, 1 Corinthians 5:7, purge out therefore the old leaven, that you may be a new lump, as you are leavened. For even Christ our Passover is sacrificed for us. Now, the obstacles to a 1-year ministry are church tradition, supported by the statements of some of the church fathers, and the fact that many scholars think that there are 2 more Passovers documented in the Gospels other than the ones near the beginning and the end of Christ's ministry. These, quote-unquote, extra Passovers are only found in the Gospel of John. But the first one of the extra ones does not actually say it's a Passover. John chapter 5, verse 1. Scholars just assumed it was. John chapter 5, verse 1. After this there was a feast of the Jews, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. So, this occurred right after Jesus returned to Galilee via Samaria from his first Passover. Because John chapter 4, he was going back up north from being at a Passover, and John chapter 5 has another Passover? Well, if that were true, then there's an entire year in the Gospel of John that's barely covered. Well, I mean, there'd have to be more events of note than that. But this Feast of the Jews in John chapter 5, verse 1, actually was Pentecost, not another Passover. All right? Now, the second supposed Passover in John chapter 6 has some textual evidence which omits the word Passover. But first, again, John chapter 5 verse 1 is a Passover, and then they say that John chapter 6 verse 4 is the second Passover. So again, in barely one chapter is supposed to be an entire year. Oh, and there's hardly anything there. So, anyway, that's the first argument against the second Passover here in John chapter 6. But also, that word Passover, there is some textual evidence that omits that word. And it just says, and a feast of the Jews was nigh. The word Passover is omitted from one manuscript and also a church father quote. Now, I admit that is not very much evidence, but there's a greater problem, because if it actually was a Passover, both Walter Cummins and Michael Rood point out that it doesn't mention that Jesus went to Jerusalem as the law requires. Even greater, it's even more suspect because it was omitted from an argument regarding this very subject, the length of Christ's ministry, by Irenaeus, a 2nd century church father. He certainly would have used it to support his position had it existed in his Bible at that time. This feast in John 6 was probably the Feast of the Wood Offering, which is the month of Ab, the 15th. It's August 7th that year. So, without these 2 extra Passovers, Jesus' ministry only spanned a little over 1 year. So, it included only 2 Passovers, one at the beginning, one near the end, and it was actually 70 weeks long. Now, one reason that I'm including this teaching on the 70 weeks of Christ's ministry is that I actually was the one that discovered it. My esteemed research colleagues developed that subject further and have since published it, and I'm happy for that because it is the linchpin that ties everything together. So I'm glad it needs as much coverage as possible. I repeat, I'm very glad they did so. The following account is exactly how the discovery of the 70 weeks occurred. It was the spring of 1983 when my wife and I were having our yearly employee review. I was a research assistant to the president of the ministry on the research team for the Way Ministry, and I was looking forward to another year of functioning on the team. But my wife was being blackballed because she had reproved her influential boss for unchristian-like behavior. We were offered positions to stay on staff for another year. I was still going to be on the research team. That's an esteemed position. But my wife was to be on probation doing menial work. The problem was, my wife was right in what she had done. She had confronted something which was the tip of the iceberg, which actually brought the entire ministry down several years later. I decided that we should not stay on staff for that ministry because to do so would have been a compromise. And I'm glad I made that decision because had we stayed and compromised, we probably would have become part of the problem and not part of the solution. So, needless to say, the last few months of our employment there were difficult. That spring in 83, right after our decision to leave, I was invited to a research symposium on the harmony of the Gospels overseen by Reverend Walter Cummins. But that was on the same day as a medical procedure scheduled for my wife. After we came back from that appointment, I made sure that she was tucked in well at home and it was okay with her if I left her there and attended the meeting. Got her all stocked up with everything that she needed. And so I got to the symposium late. I arrived just as they were taking a break. And the next item on the schedule for discussion was the topic concerning the one-year ministry of Christ. And I thought, well, that's good, because I had prepared a word study on the word year in the Bible. Is it literal or can it be figurative, right? So, as I waited for the meeting to resume, I glanced at the handouts, one of which was a calendar that had been prepared by my research associate, Reverend John Crouch, and I don't know why, but somehow I decided to count the weeks in the calendar between the date determined for Christ's baptism to the day of Pentecost. I had no idea where that thought came from. Well, now I do. There were 70 weeks. And my mind exploded because I knew what that meant. I had been appointed to put together a class on biblical chronology in 1976. And I produced it in a few months, and by God's grace, I got all the right books and learned what I needed in an efficient, short time. That research since had been used by Reverend John Shainheit and myself in Old Testament history classes, and then Ren Minetti has revised the co-reigns of the kings in our Old Testament history class, the recent one we just finished. Because chronology is so difficult, I had to chart out the entire Old Testament on a 50-foot long roll of graph paper. And it was a lot of erasing and penciling in stuff. And that was the work was based on principles I learned from Martin Anstey, The Romance of Biblical Chronology, E.W. Bullinger, his companion Bible, and Edwin R. Thiel, The Mysterious Numbers of the Hebrew Kings, plus my own research. But I still had a problem with one passage. Reverend Cummins always bugged us about it. He said, have you got that figured out yet? Have you got that figured out yet? And that was Daniel's 70 weeks. It seemed to be a tantalizingly possible way to span between the Old Testament and the New, instead of using Ptolemy's canon, because that was a king's list from a non-biblical source. But try as we all might, nobody could fit Daniel's 70 weeks with Scripture and history. Now, many chronologists had proposed that 70 weeks as, quote-unquote, weeks of years, like sabbatical years, or 490 years, expanding upon the sabbatical year concept. But no one could still get that to fit. And so there were a lot of theories. Robert Anderson then published his book, The Coming Prince, on that subject. We'll get to that in a moment, why I believe he is incorrect. But we'll get to that in a bit. But there I sat at that meeting as it was about ready to reconvene with the answer. Because of my chronology research, I was familiar with Daniel 9, and it was actually the length of the Messiah's ministry, 70 weeks. Wow. So many phrases in Daniel 9 suddenly made sense. Quote, to finish the transgression and to make an end of sins and to make reconciliation for iniquity and to bring in everlasting righteousness and to seal up the vision and prophecy and to anoint the most holy. All of those things are concerning the Messiah. And then, almost unbelievably, verse 27 goes on to say, and he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week. Well, that was Holy Week. And then, on that Wednesday, quote, in the midst of the week, he shall cause the sacrifice and oblation to cease. Jesus died on Wednesday in the middle of the week and arose on Saturday. He was the supreme sacrifice, after which no more were necessary. It all fit. His entire ministry was 70 weeks long. Whoa, Nellie, I felt like I was sitting on a bomb. I hastily recounted the weeks on the calendar just to make sure as the meeting was being called to order. And then incredibly and surreally for me, I was sitting there so excited. And Walter Cummins announced, we do not have much evidence now regarding a 1-year ministry to discuss it at this time. So we'll move on to the next subject. I raised my hand and I said, Walter, I have something I'd like to share. You know, since I decided to leave my position there because of the situation I had explained earlier, I could have been vindictive and shut up and kept it all to myself and published it later and took all the credit. But you know what? The Dead Sea Scrolls scholars had done that, and the thought of that was repugnant to me, because the Dead Sea Scrolls scholars had kept exclusive rights to all the texts of the Dead Sea Scrolls for years and lived off them, publishing their own works and not releasing the texts for other scholars to study. And it wasn't until somebody reverse engineered the text from a concordance that these blokes published. And then they grudgingly released the texts for others to study once it was out. Well, the Word of God is something too pure to hold hostage like that. And if I'd kept that insight to myself, you know what? I probably wouldn't have gotten any more. But I didn't. And since then, I've received many biblical insights. So I raised my hand and Walter let me speak. So I briefly shared about my word study on the word year, and then I dropped the bomb about the 70 weeks. And when I finished, Walter replied incredulously, "Are you sure?" And I said, "Walter, I counted it twice." And then incredibly, for the space of about half an hour, there was silence in the meeting. I thought of that verse in Revelation about when the seventh seal was opened and there was silence in heaven for the space of half an hour. It was a momentous occasion like that. There were quite a few people there, but all you could hear was Bible pages flipping. It was the greatest moment of biblical research I'd ever witnessed, for it made years and years of biblical research by many contributors fit. We were indeed standing on the shoulders of them who had gone before us to reach that pinnacle of truth, and it was a missing link. Jesus really did die on a Wednesday, not a Friday, because all the math fit. He actually was born in 3 BC, as the astronomy of the Star of Bethlehem dictated. His ministry did start in 27 AD, when Jesus was about 30, as all the information in Luke 3 says. We're going to cover all this in other sessions, and I'm going to get our associate teachers to teach that stuff, and we're going to see all the puzzle pieces fit. So his ministry was not 3.5 years long. We had just witnessed the understanding of how a key biblical prophecy had been fulfilled. Daniel's other prophecies about the empires to come were so accurate, like Ren Manetti had presented. They in themselves have been a proof of the divine authorship of the Bible. And now, one more thing had been unlocked, like the cherry on top. Walter finally broke the silence and exclaimed to John Crouch, "I'm glad you made that calendar." So in case anyone objects, I affirm that this account is exactly what happened over 40 years ago. I can remember it as if it were yesterday. So I think I have the right to include it in this class. My wife and I moved back to our condo after that in Chicago, and Walter Cummins and John Crouch went on to develop the Sound Out Seminar and to write a book on the topic titled Jesus Christ, Our Apostle and High Priest, and also A Harmony of the Gospels. The seminar was taught once in Tennessee, but the book was never published because a few years later, when the ministry imploded, Walter and John left, and the former ministry buried that book. Since then, Walter has published another book, The Acceptable Year of the Lord. It has a lot more research in it, and the 70 weeks topic is only a small part. So again, I am declaring my love and respect and support for Walter Cummins and his books and research. Implied by my sharing it that day was the permission to use it, and I am overjoyed that the truth came out despite the other ministry quashing that first book. Now, the key to understand this prophecy in Daniel is to realize that it is an introversion, a chiastic structure. Daniel 9:24 contains 6 items which form a symmetric structure. Therefore, the opposite categories, A, B, C, C, B, A, the opposite A can be used to explain the first A. The opposite A can be used to opposite B, the first B, and the opposite C, the first C. Okay? And so you use the counterparts. You go back and forth. So here we go. Daniel chapter 9, verse 24. 70 weeks are determined upon thy people and upon thy holy city to finish the transgression, and to make an end of sins, and to make reconciliation for iniquity, and to bring in everlasting righteousness, and to seal up the vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy. There are 6 infinitives. That's that construction of the verb with the word to in front of it. Okay? Infinitives. There are 6 infinitives and phrases that are separated by ands. There's an and in front of each one. So, that's polysyndeton. The significance of the figure of speech polysyndeton is that each item is important and merits consideration. Now, there are other lists without ands in them. That's called asyndeton, and that's meant to be run through quickly till you get to the end. But this, with polysyndeton, is meant to be a momentous summary of things. Actually, we are being treated to a pinnacle of understanding of the great prophet Daniel. And since the A's and the B's and C's correspond, A, B, C, C, B, A, how those phrases structure, we can compare and contrast them to gain further insight, because that's what we learned to do in Psalms and Proverbs that are written in Hebrew poetry. Same kind of structure. So, we can apply also what we just learned in the prior session, 5a, about the misunderstandings of the words of Jesus. When there was controversy and misunderstanding, had Jesus ever spoken literally? No. The same kind of thing applies here. We have read lots of prophecies in the Old Testament history class we just finished. So I think we understand a lot about prophecy. And one important thing is that prophecy is highly symbolic. Therefore, prophecy speak, for lack of a better term, the language of prophecy speak, being symbolic, is highly figurative by nature. So, should it be taken literally? Well, that's what a lot of the 490-year crowd has tried, attaching events to this phrase or that. Well, I don't think we should do so, because prophecy is highly figurative. Another thing we learned in the Old Testament history class is that ambiguities in prophecy can be cleared up in light of their New Testament fulfillment. For example, in Isaiah 9:6, quote, "His name shall be called," unquote. Well, the New Testament prophecies, the New Testament fulfillments of the prophecy specify which of the translation options in Isaiah 9:6 are the correct ones. All right? So, we shall see that the 70 weeks fit so well. Its fulfillment is obvious, because it fits mathematically so well with everything that we know about when Jesus was born, the date of the crucifixion, etc., etc. So that fitting helps us look back at this Daniel prophecy to put it together. So, the A's are to finish the transgression. The other A is to anoint the most holy. The B, to make an end of sins. But make an end actually is Hebrew for seal. To seal an end of sins. And look at the B corresponding. And to seal up the vision and prophecy. And then the C's, to make reconciliation for iniquity and to bring in everlasting righteousness. You see how those go together. So, what does it mean to finish the transgression? The first A? The answer is in the corresponding A. When was the most holy, the Messiah, anointed. When was he anointed? When he received the Spirit, when he was baptized. See, our tendency is to look at this chronological, but the structure trumps that. It's arranged in a different criteria than time. So that's why the A's can go together, all right? So, when was the Most Holy, the Messiah, anointed? When he received the Spirit, when he was baptized. So the A's go together. And when that happened, there was a phenomenal voice from heaven. That indicates an administration change, a momentous time when it was celebrated by spiritual fireworks. So the transgression that was finished, since it was an end of an administration, we can say that that was the transgression being finished is the end of the law administration that dealt with transgressions. The baptism of Christ on Sunday, Shabbat 20th, February 16th, 27 A.D., was the beginning of the 70 weeks when Jesus was baptized. Now, then, the B terms involve Christ's death and resurrection to seal an end of sins and to seal up the vision and prophecy. God inserted that seal, to make sure we saw this arrangement, that they were related in the introversion. That's what that repetition of the word seal does. It's a Hebrew word, chatham. So when Christ was raised from among the dead, that was the consummation of the ages. As Hebrew 9 affirms, that event made God's future inevitable. It sealed it. Hebrews 9:26. Hebrews 9:26. For then, he, Jesus, often have suffered since the foundation of the world. But now, once, in the end, consummation of the ages, hath he appeared to put away sin by the sacrifice of himself. What ages? The administrations. And so, if you chart out the 7 administrations, they are in introversion too. A, B, C, D, C, B, A, and the D in the center is the Christ administration. The focus, the turning point of it all. Anyway, once Jesus had risen from among the dead on May 1st, 28 A.D., everything was sealed. When Jesus was successfully raised from among the dead, everything the prophets had foretold was sealed. No one, absolutely no one could stop it from happening. The gathering together, the resurrections, the millennial kingdom, paradise, the devil's demise, the new heaven and earth were sealed. They shall occur. Hallelujah, Sakatuya. Eternity became a foregone conclusion. It was sealed. Finally, the C terms taken together must be the day of Pentecost, June 20th, 28 A.D., when reconciliation became possible and everlasting righteousness for believers commenced. That constituted the end of the 70 weeks. Now, Daniel 9 goes on with more information. Daniel 9, verse 25. Now, therefore, and understand that from the going forth of the commandment, and it's called a decree, to restore and to build Jerusalem unto Messiah the Prince shall be 7 weeks, and 62 weeks, and the street shall be built again, and the wall, even in troublesome times. This is a prophecy, and it's in true ethereal form. It's spoken from God's perspective, not man's. The street and the wall. That's like the expression Alpha and Omega, or soup to nuts, from A to Z. It is something entire. The two extremities represent the whole. This is the figure of speech merismos, or the modern term is merism, in which a combination of two contrasting parts of the whole figuratively refer to the whole. For example, we say, searched high and low. That means we searched everywhere. So, the street and the wall is not literal. It's figurative, meaning everything was rebuilt. But if we look at it in light of its New Testament fulfillment, did Jesus physically rebuild any streets or walls? No. But all was rebuilt spiritually. Jesus definitely completed the repair work to repair the broken relationship between God and man since Adam. That was so fantastic. Its accomplishment was so emphatic. Oh, that was much greater than any physical rebuild could ever be. Now, this is not to say that this prophecy might have a dual fulfillment. There are some prophecies like that. For example, Isaiah 7:14, a virgin shall conceive a son and call his name Emmanuel. Well, in the Old Testament history class, we saw that happen twice. We know the rules for double fulfillments too. They are possible if the key words of a prophecy have more than one meaning. Well, there are different nuances of the word virgin. It can mean a young woman, and that was the fulfillment of the first time. Or it can mean the modern meaning. That was the fulfillment of the second time. Another example of how prophecies can intermix is in the quote-unquote prophecy speak of Revelation chapter 12 and following. There, events are juxtaposed timelessly and refer to things that happened when Jesus was born, as well as things in the past and things still in the future. And it's all mixed up. Well, there's no timeline there. God doesn't have to be subject to time. He's from outside of our dimension. Its sequence is not on a timeline like we'd expect, but Revelation 12 is structured differently. So, in context of the weeks being enumerated in Daniel 9, what was the decree to restore and build Jerusalem? Was it some pagan king's commandment? No. In light of its fulfillment, it would have to be the voice from heaven when Jesus was baptized. Who? Men only heard, "This is my beloved Son in whom I am well pleased." But to Jesus, that was the go sign, God's endorsement. In the Daniel prophecy, it was even called a decree. We shall see other oracles of God in future sessions that are called decrees too. Jesus had all the heavenly endorsement he needed to commence his Father's work. Only he knew what all that was. But this is exactly what Jesus' job was, to restore and rebuild Jerusalem. You think, might, upon this rock will I build my church, have something to do with that? You think, might, destroy this temple in 3 days I will raise it up, might have something to do with that? I bet there are other statements we can see with opened eyes. The Judeans were looking forward to a political deliverance who would restore Jerusalem to its rightful place in the world, even greater than it was in the times of David and Solomon. But Jesus first came to do the job spiritually. Look at Luke. Look at Luke chapter 3, verse 5. Luke chapter 3, verse 5. Every valley shall be filled, and every mountain and hill shall be brought low, and the crooked shall be made straight, and the rough ways shall be made smooth. All flesh shall see the salvation of God. Wait a minute. Was every physical valley filled? Was every mountain shaved off? No, not physically, but spiritually. The huge chasms of need were filled. The looming mountains of the adversary's power leering over everything were crushed. Aha! It was spiritual. Do you see? Daniel 9 speaks of 2 time periods, 7 weeks and 62 weeks. Were they successive or concurrent? It could be taken 2 ways if we try to match them to the events in the New Testament fulfillment in 28 AD. Holy Week did indeed start after the 62 weeks. If we count beginning with Jesus' baptism and ending on the day the voice from heaven occurred in the Nisan the 10th when the Passover lamb was chosen in John 12. Wow. A voice from heaven bracketed both ends. Then after that, the 1 week in the midst of the week. In Daniel 9:27 fit. That's Holy Week. And Jesus died, and the supreme sacrifice happened on Wednesday in the middle of the week. Then, now, if we count the 7 weeks concurrently from the baptism, it brings us to the 10th of Nisan in 27 AD in Passover week. That first year, that was the date that Jesus arrived in Jerusalem the first time and when he cleansed the temple. Well, he cleansed the temple on the 10th of Nisan, the second Passover. So we discover Jesus cleansed the temple exact same date, 1 year apart. So that's why the 7-week period could be significant if we say it's concurrent with the 62. All right? But it might be possible to put the 7-week period at the end. And that would correspond to the 7 weeks between the resurrection and Pentecost. The end of that counting was Messiah the Prince, which would be on Pentecost when he officially took the reins of the church and became the Prince, God's Viceroy, his Grand Vizier, his co-reign. That would be the more logical understanding of the 70 weeks. 62 plus 1 plus 7 is 70. Daniel 9:26 now moves on to further details. This is where it begins to be apparent that there must be an expansion of time involved with verse 26. Verse 26 and 27 are not necessarily chronological. The prophecy expands upon the destruction of Jerusalem before returning to the actual order of events. Daniel 9:26. And after 62 weeks shall Messiah be cut off. That's the idiom for die. But not for himself. And the people of the prince that shall come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary, and the end thereof shall be with a flood. And unto the end of the war, desolations are determined. Wow. Verse 26 foretells that the Messiah will be cut off after the 62 weeks. Jesus died after the 62nd week, in the 63rd week, but it's after, right? Still fits. Then it says the people of a coming prince shall destroy the city and sanctuary. Well, that did happen in 70 AD, and the prince was Titus, who later became emperor of Rome. Now, could have a second fulfillment later. And the end of the city did come with a flood, shetef, because it can mean a literal flood, but also that word is used figuratively of an invading army, according to Brown Driver Briggs. After the siege of Jerusalem broke, the Romans rushed in. They destroyed the temple, and the abomination of desolation did occur. The altar and the temple were desecrated. Jesus predicted this in Matthew 24 when he declared that not one stone would be left upon another. So thorough the destruction by the Roman army was, they were so enraged with the Jews for their stubbornness that they stormed the city, murdered thousands, burnt down the temple, and then they pried apart the stones to recover any melted gold from the burnt treasury that had been kept in the temple. So far, this prophecy remarkably still tracks with history. And remember, any ambiguities in the Old Testament prophecy are cleared up by the New Testament fulfillment. It doesn't mean what men want it to mean. It means what fits. Daniel chapter 9, verse 27. The first part. And he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week. And in the midst of the week, he shall cause the sacrifice and the oblation, the offering, to cease. Well, that week was Holy Week, April 25th to May 1st in 28 AD. That is when the covenant was confirmed. And the many is all of us who've been blessed thereby. Jesus was tortured, crucified, died, and rose that week. And it was a literal week. It ended just before Saturday evening when the next week began. In the middle of the week on a Wednesday, Jesus died at the same time the Passover lamb was killed and was the supreme sacrifice for sin, as the book of Hebrews explained. And the daily sacrifices and the people's offerings were no longer necessary. It's remarkable how all this ancient prophecy fits. Second half of Daniel 9:27. And for the overspreading of abominations, he shall make it desolate even until the consummation. And that still is true. The temple is no more. Even today. Until the consummation. When's that? And that determined shall be poured upon the desolate. So the second temple's never been rebuilt. Daniel predicted that this desolation will last even to the time of consummation. The temple's supposed to exist again in the future. It'll exist, the same temple that the Antichrist shall occupy, as 2 Thessalonians 2:4 says. So again, prophecy in Daniel fits. Now I know there are some terms that are a bit enigmatic, but that's what prophecy speaks like. And it absolutely cannot be the work of a revisionist scribe, like the higher critics say, that changed the text to fit events, writing it after it happened, as some skeptics have postulated about the prophecies of Daniel. No, they were predicted, and it is a great proof of the divine nature of the Bible. For, what Masoretic Jewish scribe would have tried to word the text to say the Messiah had already come? Oh, no. So 70 weeks? Yeah. How is that a year? Well, it isn't. 70 weeks was the total length from his baptism to Pentecost, but the acceptable year of the Lord actually ran from 27 AD, Pentecost, through Pentecost 28 AD. We're going to cover that when we get to Luke 4. We know that this is true because when Jesus read from the scrolls in his home synagogue, he read from Isaiah 61, and the Jews had set up a 3-year cycle to read the Old Testament. Isaiah 61 was read the Sabbath before Pentecost in the second year of the cycle. So when he reads from Luke 4, the acceptable year of the Lord, that's from Pentecost 27 AD to Pentecost 28 AD. But was that year like our years? The Hebrew calendar is a lunar-based calendar, while the year we observe is a solar year. That's why Easter and Rosh Hashanah occur on different dates every year. Our calendar was established by Julius Caesar in 46 BC. Then it was adjusted by Pope Gregory in 1582. That's why it's called the Gregorian calendar. Back in Roman times, while most of the occupied lands of Rome adopted the Roman calendar, the Jews tenaciously held to their own because their religion and feasts were dependent on it. The Jewish calendar is made up of 6 30-day months and 6 29-day months that alternate because it follows the period of the moon. Each month begins with the new moon, and now if you add that up, 6 times 30 plus 6 times 29, it results in a year that's 11 days short of an actual year-long orbit of the earth around the sun. So the Jews accommodated originally by having a leap year, quote-unquote, every 3 years or so, and that leap year contained a leap month instead of a leap day, a leap month, a 13th month called Second Adar. After that, their year was still 3 days short. After doing that for 3 years and having the year with 1/13th month, those 3 days that were short would accumulate every so often. They would have to have another year that had a second Adar that was scheduled sooner than every 3 years. The high priest would send a servant out into the fields to discern the state of the barley crop because they had to meet a certain schedule. There was a wave offering of the first fruits of the barley harvest that was observed during the Feast of Unleavened Bread. So, to do that, the barley had to be ripe enough, so the servant would inspect it and determine if it could be mature 2 weeks later in time for that special offering. And if it wasn't, then the high priest would declare, ta-da, it's leap month, second Adar. That would give the barley more time so that it would be ripe enough for this special offering. And that method of sending the guy out into the field to inspect and see persisted while there was a sitting Sanhedrin in Jerusalem. That calendar was established at the time of the Exodus, I believe, when God commanded Moses in Exodus 12:2, this month shall be the beginning of months for you. Because before that, they'd been on the Egyptian calendar that had a 360-day year and a 5-day festival at the end. But for some reason, they didn't account for the extra quarter day every year. So the Egyptian calendar every 4 years fell back by 1 day. Woo! And at the time of the Exodus, chronologers believe it had fallen back 6 whole months. The Hebrew calendar was used throughout the Old Testament until the Babylonian captivity, when the Jews were forced to use the Babylonian calendar, but it was also lunar-based and had a similar leap year cycle. Then in the 4th century A.D., Hillel II established the form of the Jewish calendar, which is still observed today, which has a 19-year cycle where the leap years occur in a preset sequence. This 19-year cycle is called the Metonic cycle because every 19 years the solar calendar and 235 lunar months calendar match each other, and the Earth is at the exact same point around its orbit of the Sun. 19 years times 12 lunar months is 228 months. Consequently, 7 extra second-8-hour intercalary months would need to be inserted one at a time every so often to keep the Jewish lunar calendar in sync. The 14th of Nisan fell on a Wednesday in the year that Jesus was crucified. That's the only way you can get 3 days and 3 nights. Jesus predicted that he'd be buried, all right, as well as the other sequences involved. And so this fits the middle of the week in Daniel 9:27 because he died on a Wednesday. The ancient Jewish calendar was reconstructed by Parker and Duberstein in their book. You can Google that, and you can actually download it for free off of archive.org. And they document that 28 AD was a Jewish leap year, and there's an interesting confirmation of that leap year that's in John 10. Look at John 10:22. John 10:22. It says, "And it was at Jerusalem, the feast of the dedication, and it was winter." Duh! Why does it say, "and it was winter"? The feast of dedication is always during the winter. Why is it there? Well, it's not a spurious phrase because, everybody knows Hanukkah, feast of dedication's in the winter. That phrase was there for a reason. I believe the reason was that it was really cold. Of course, that makes sense if you were the adversary, because he's the prince of the power of the air. He could still mismanage the dominion of the earth and make it cold. Why? To dissuade people from attending Jesus' outdoor meetings. It was cold. The problem is that the curry favor with their master, his daimons that did the dirty work, apparently outdid themselves, and they made it too cold. And so the most ironic part of all of this was that then the high priest, who was born of the devil, Jesus said, had to declare a whole extra month. Ta-da! It's second Adar! Because the barley harvest wasn't ready yet. Woohoo! That's why Passover was so late that year. Because of the uncertainty of the calendar every year, people could not make firm travel plans to Jerusalem for Passover until they knew for sure that there wouldn't be a second Adar. Well, when the high priest had to declare the extra month, there was nothing better to do for these people than to go out and hear Jesus. So the devil shot himself in the foot again. So that's the 70 weeks of Daniel. And we'll cover more chronology in future sessions. So, bless you.